출가 그 초기, 그야말로 막 신심이 있을 때 그때 기분으로 돌아간 것 같은, 또 뭐 정목스님, 미산스님, 뭐 덕신스님, 대학 다닐 때 같이 공부를 했잖아요. 여기서 와서 만나니까 내가 지금 대학을 다니고 있는 때 그 마음, 그 기분, 그러니까 벌써 한 40년의 세월이 갑자기 이렇게 텅 비면서 그때 그 기분, 그 마음이 느껴지는 것 같아서 너무 좋았어요.
제가 이제 출간이 45년 됐고요. 나이가 내년 70이에요. 방송이나 강의를 이제 하면서 그동안 이제 쉼 없이 달려왔어요. 이제는 한 번쯤은 내 마음의 스위치를 끄는 시간이 필요하다. 또 여기 모이신 많은 또 스님들이 바로 내 스승이잖아요. 그냥 나도 무언에 힘을 좀 이렇게 나도 얻고 같이 이렇게 공감하고 공유하고 수행하고 있음으로써 다시 또 새로운 마음으로 해야 된다. 그 다음에 내가 어떻게 사람들을 만날 것인가, 그리고 내 수행은 어떻게 해야 될 것인가, 그거를 제가 생각하는 시간이에요.
Yes, it kind of reminded me a bit of what it was like back in the old days in the Sampang. Of course, it was much bigger and many more people than we had, but there was that sense of a group practice together that really is very supportive, I think, especially for younger monks and nuns, like I was when I was first here. When you're first starting off, it really is helpful to have that support group of what the Buddhists call good friends, you know, kalyana mitra, sanjishik. I think in Korea we often think of sanjishik as being the great teachers, but actually the sanjishik are your friends too, that help guide you and help keep you on the path. And having a group practice like that really is an important way to build that sense of camaraderie between monks and nuns together. It makes practice much more meaningful, I think, and much more consistent than it would be on your own. You know, if you're by yourself, sometimes you can get lazy, but together, there's no chance. You work together all the time. So. I wanted to talk a little bit about Vipassana and Sanbulgyo. I think especially in the West, I'm not sure about Korea, but I think this is true here too. Vipassana is often portrayed as being the original practice of the Buddha. But in actual fact, what we know as Vipassana is not the same as the Satipatthana Sutta and the four foundations of mindfulness, the Sanyamcha. I don't believe anywhere in the Pali Nikayas the word vipassana appears. Vipassana is a later commentarial term, not a sutra term. Vipassana is a system of training that began in Burma under very specific conditions, which I'll explain. It's a modern creation. It's created in the 19th century by a Burmese monk named Ledi Sayadaw. And the reason why he created it is because he felt Buddhism was in its Malpap stage. It was about to decline and disappear. In 1885, the British Crown conquered Burma. The Burmese royal family had always supported the Sangha, the Buddhist Sangha. For these conquered lands, Queen Victoria of England, her policy toward other religions was what she called non-interference, which means they would stay out of the religious affairs of the conquered countries. But what this meant was that the the British government would not support the Buddhist Sangha any longer. And the Burmese monks were afraid that because of this, Buddhism was going to disappear. So they needed to create a new form of Buddhism that could be easily taught to lay people and by lay people in case the Sangha disappeared. So they took two tacks. The first was to reduce doctrine down to a single text. The text they used was the Abhidhamma Sangha, which is a primer of Abhidharma practice, Abhidharma teachings. The second tack was to reduce all the different kinds of meditation performed in Burma at that time down into a very simple modern system that could be standardized and be taught by lay people. It could be easily accessible by lay people and taught by lay people. So it was systematic, it was simple, it was easy to teach, and it could be practiced by lay people and transmitted by lay people without the necessity of monks. And in fact, many of the most accomplished teachers of Vipassana, especially those known in the West, like Goenka, are lay people, they're not monks. But because of the systematization of Vipassana, it's easy to teach, and it's easy to teach by multiple levels of people with experience, by multiple levels of experience. So if you know a little bit, you can teach a little. If you know a little bit more, you can teach a little bit more. If you know a lot, you can teach a lot. But you can scale it up gradually. Now, Kanwa-san has a much longer history, 1,300 years in Korea. But the challenge, I think, of Kanwa-san is that it is not easily scalable. In other words, you can't have a little bit of knowledge about Kanwa-san and teach a little bit. You can have a little bit more, teach a little bit more. You either know it or you don't. So you need one experienced teacher to teach many people. But the trouble is, even the most accomplished teachers, like Woram-s님, like Subul-s님, one person teaching a few more, but there's no scale there. So this is a big challenge, I think, for the Choge order. The Choge order wants to take Kanwa-san and globalize it. But how do you globalize something that only has a limited number of accomplished teachers? I've been thinking about this a lot for many years in the West. And at one time, a few years ago, we were at Pongamsa and had an interesting discussion with 정목스님, who was the Sanwanjang at Pongamsa. 그분은 나는 옛날에는 그 수선사, 송갈사 선방에서 같이 지냈는데 얼마나 깊게 그토록 가는 사람이 있다고 생각했습니다. 아주 훌륭하신 분입니다. 아주 존경합니다. 그분은. So I asked him, could you have a 간화적인 vipassana practice? And the reason this thought came to me is that he mentioned that many of the young monks coming to Bongamsa had started off their meditation practice with vipassana. And so he had to kind of correct their understanding when he began teaching them Kanwa-san. So I thought, well, maybe there's another way. He didn't answer. 오래동안 아무 소리도 없고 가만히 앉아가지고 I was really afraid I had offended him somehow. But after about 2 minutes, 2분 후에 계속 가만히 앉아가지고 깊이 생각하고 그럴 수 있겠네. Maybe that's possible, he said.
Yeah.
But then one of his disciples said, oh, but Sunim, very different, like Kanwa-san and Vipassana, very different. He said, oh yeah, that's right, different. But later on, I was reading in the commentaries to the Satipatthana Sutta. Yeah. And in the commentaries, there's a very interesting section where he talks, where the commentator is talking about mindfulness of the body. Yeah. And the first of these is mindfulness of the 4 postures, walking, standing, sitting, lying down. The commentator says that if you add a questioning component to your vipassana, to your practice of mindfulness of the body, this will dramatically strengthen the vipassana component. So you ask, who is it who is walking? Who is it who is standing? Who is it who is sitting? Who is it who is lying down? 수남차에서도 똑같은 말 나와요. Who is it who feels or senses? So the commentator says that by bringing in this questioning dimension to vipassana, you're countering the wrong view that I am walking, I am sitting, I am lying down. You remove the sense of self, in other words, by questioning. I think this sounds very much like the core, the foundational hwadu, imoko. And I think also, if you look at Jino's discussion of Kanwa-san, I think there is a bit of a system there that might be somehow scalable. It could be built up. Jino himself does not talk about scaling up teaching. For him, it's still very much teacher-student, teacher-student. Very close relationship that way. And lineage is still important. He transmits his lineage also to Jinga Keishim. So he's traditional in that sense. But I think by opening up Kanwa-san to gradations of understanding, chamri and chamgu, there's sort of a system there where you could use like what Woramsinim does, using doctrine as a way to sort of introduce and encourage meditation, right? So with Chamri, the investigation of the meaning, Jino says very clearly, I think in his mind there was an intellectual component. This is where doctrine could play an important role in sort of manifesting that Chamri. And Jino says, for example, that Chamri means specifically you understand the nature and characteristics of the mind. So you understand that your nature is to be enlightened, and it has these different qualities and characteristics. That is something which can be learned through study of texts. So might it be possible that you have one layer of Kanwa-san teachers who really understand the doctrine and are able to teach people about the sung and the sang, the nature and characteristics of the mind, which would help to sort of frame people's practice from that point on. That framing could be done by people without maybe deep understanding, but some understanding, different gradations of understanding. As people's understanding is clarified through this study then, they understand the nature and characteristics of mind. At that point, they could be passed off, maybe, to more advanced teachers who could help them to deepen the sense of doubt, of inquiry, of questioning, and really focus on building that doubt. That's where the real Kanwa-san teachers could step in. Because Jino says for most people, they will not be able to deepen that sense of doubt and do chamgu without already having their understanding clarified. They know why they're doing it, in other words. So that clarification could be done at one stage where finally the deepening of the doubt and the full focus on doubt could take place in the second stage with more advanced teachers. So just one idea of how it might be built into a system, I think. But this is something which you monks and nuns who are actually practicing are going to have to think through yourself if you hope to use Kanwa-san as a way to globalize Korean Buddhism. Vipassana is really not a very old tradition at all. And it is definitely not Wonshi Bulgyo, absolutely not. It's a very contemporary practice. And for example, in Burma, the reason why they developed Vipassana is because Vipassana, the way it is taught, they can jettison the whole samadhi aspect of practice and have what they call kanika samadhi, very momentary samadhi enough to be able to develop Vipassana. So it's a simplification which jettisons the whole early part of practice and focuses just on the very end. So it's an attempt to simplify the Buddhist path so it can be practiced more easily by lay people without much training. Kanwa-san, but I think in many ways it was designed to be also a simplification of the Buddhist path. Because since in the Sun School they cannot rely on words and letters, so if you can't use scriptures, what can you use? You can use only the sayings of previous teachers in your tradition then. But if you look even at like Dehe Sojang Isanun, the vast majority of the letters that he writes where he outlines Kanwa-san is directed to lay people, to literati. And so what I think Dahui is trying to do there is to find a technique that can be taught simply and quickly to a lay audience without a lot of training behind it necessarily. But I think in Korea, because of this background with Jinul Bojoguksa, there's more of a sense of Kanwasan being not just a simplification of Buddhism, but as a comprehensive technique for mastering all of Buddhism. So this is why I think Kanwasan actually could serve a similar role that Vipassana has played in expanding Buddhism beyond the monastic audience. It could be expanded, I think, to be taught more globally. I think one of the challenges, though, is that outside of East Asia, the dominant type of meditation people know about is what we call mindfulness, kind of vipassana. And mindfulness practice has deeply embedded itself into Western culture now. There's all kinds of books, mindfulness of eating, a mindful relationship, using mindfulness in all these different ways within society. Even a mindful death is a recent title that I've seen. But this just shows how a Buddhist idea, like mindfulness, can embed itself quite deeply in a new culture and take on very different sorts of textures in that culture. So if Kanwasan is, like Vipassana was, an attempt to simplify and consolidate all of Buddhism into one practice, couldn't the same be done with Kanwasan? Because Kanwasan, I think itself, is very difficult to teach just by itself to a Western audience with no background. And there are reasons for that, but which I can talk about also. But I think it might be possible to sort of build off the mindfulness movement and sort of create a kind of Korean style of mindfulness that draws instead on Kanwasan. And so you could have a mindfulness training using some of the Vipassana techniques, but then build onto that this entire Kanwa dimension on doubt, on Wishin. One of the challenges is that Sun got to the West early on through Japan. So many of the monks that we hear about will be mentioned in Japanese pronunciation, for example. 또 화두이란 말은 한 사람도 모릅니다 무엇인지. 근데 koan they know. koan 알고 있습니다. So when Koreans come in, then, just as Sungsan Srinim had to do, in order to make his teaching accessible to the existing audience, he had to kind of adapt some of the elements of the Japanese tradition. So it might be that in one way to kind of build Korean Buddhism is to kind of co-opt these movements, either co-opt Japanese Zen or co-opt Burmese Vipassana practice, but make it instead something distinctively Korean. Just an idea.
요즘 젊은 층을 대상으로 불교가 굉장히 젊어지려고 하는 그런 노력, 그런 어떤 움직임은 대단히 긍정적이라고 생각을 합니다. 굳이 불교란 것을 전파하지 않더라도 어떤 불교의 어떤 가르침이 녹아들 수 있는 그러한 어떤 형태로서의 요즘의 어떤 동적이면서 좀 재미를 곁들이는 그렇게 유발시키는 것은 대단히 긍정적이죠. 그렇지만 그 속에다가 어떤 불교의 근본 정신이라고 하고 있은 고통으로서의 해방, 또 어떤 생사해탈이라고 하는 이 근본 명제를 항상 잊지 않고 그쪽 방향으로 이끌어지는 그런 쪽으로 나아간다고 한다면은 더없이 좋은 그런 어떤 교화의 방편으로 작용되어지지 않을까 이렇게 생각을 합니다.
지금 현대 시대는 너무나 다양화되어 있고 불교는 안팎이 없어요. 그래서 타는 스님도 외도는 없다 하셨어요. 마음을 다루는 건 다 내전이고 다 불법이다 이러셨는데, 그래서 다양한 시도들이 필요합니다. 결국은 모든 강물이 흘러서 바다로 가게 마련이기 때문에 결국에는 우리 근본 마음으로 돌아갈 수 있는 그런 요소를 다 갖추고 있고, 어떤 형태로든 방편은 다 수용될 수 있죠. 근데 제가 생각할 때 이제 가장 중요한 것은 우리가 부처님의 삶과 부처님의 그 수행 그리고 인생을 이렇게 보면서 그걸 이제 따라서 얼마만큼 이제 근본을 잃지 않고 사느냐가 중요하기 때문에, 저 같은 경우는 그 많은 공부나 이런 학문이나 이런 수행 방법 중에서도 우리 한국의 전통적인 수행과 우리가 보았던 그 경전들, 텍스트들 이런 부분들의 맥을 놓치지 않도록 이어서 그 시대에 맞게 그렇게 설명을 해주고 강의를 하고 볼 수 있는 그런 이 내용들을 남겨놓는 것이 중요하겠다. 그래서 전통과 현대 고금이 이렇게 교차하는 지점에서 이 현대인에게, 우리가 또 젊은 청년들에게 다가가지 못한다면 끊임없이 우리도 변화해야죠. 그래서 그 내용들이 중요하다면 우리 젊은 모든 분들에게 감흥이 될 수 있는 방식으로 현대적 언어로 시대적 문법으로 다가가야 된다고 생각을 합니다. 그런 내용이 현실화되려면 정확하게 고전이나 그 다음에 한학이나 그 다음에 원론적인 부분들, 이런 부분들을 더 정확하게 알아야 됩니다. 그래서 현대에 맞춰서 아주 적실한 언어로 전달을 해야 돼서 그런 부분들에 대한 그 연구와 저서를 저는 하려고 하고 있고요. 많은 스님들이나 많은 불자 여러분들이 지금 다양하게 노력하고 있거든요. 근데 전 세계가 명상을 한다는 거는 말하자면 우리가 우리 조계종이 선종이듯이 전 세계가 선불교요. 어떻게 보면 종교하고 상관없이 전부 이제 선종이 되어가고 있는 과정이거든요. 인간 근본의 마음을 닦자는 것이기 때문에 그것에 있어서는 다를 바가 없기 때문에 우리가 하는 방법이 결코 틀리지 않았다. 확신을 가지고 우리 그 한국인이 살아왔던, 우리가 공부해왔던 그런 내용들을 자긍심을 가지고 다양하게 펼쳤으면 하는 생각입니다.
There is a sense of crisis regarding Buddhism. So, as a scholar, what direction do you believe Korean Buddhism should take in the future?
Well, the decline in the monastic populations is something you see in all kind of monastic communities. It's not just in Buddhism. It's Catholicism has the exact same problem, and it's just I think more a matter of much of what I think you can get from a monastic community is available through lay practice as well now. So, for example, in the West, I think I personally don't believe that Buddhism will ever be a primarily monastic community in the West. I think it will be a primarily lay community where people may have a kind of a quasi-monastic life, a community life, but are still lay people, not monks. And I think this is a challenge that any monastic tradition like Buddhism is going to have to face. How do you adapt to an increasingly secular environment like you find in the West or in Korea, for that matter? And I think there's been a lot of work done to try to find a way to sort of frame the community, the monastic community, in a way that will make it more accessible to lay practice. So I mean, one thing you never saw when I was a monk here in the 1970s was lay people in sampang practicing in monasteries. Together, or even having a lay sampang this was just not done. People would come to the monastery for training, meaning a 2 or 3 day session, usually a Bosarige, a Bodhisattva precept ceremony. They'd have lectures at the same time. Maybe they would do Yongming Chengjin, sit for one night and then leave the following day. And that was really the extent of lay practice. Nowadays, you have many monasteries where there is actually an active lay practice going on also. And many of the I think the greatest teachers in Korean Buddhism nowadays, people like Subu Sinim and Haeguk Sinim and Waram Sinim, all of them are also trying to cater to a lay community who wants to practice Kanwa-san. So there has been this attempt to kind of broaden the community, so it isn't just monks and nuns anymore, it's really the fourfold community the Buddha's talked about, monks and nuns and laymen and lay women. And in some sense, this goes back to even the Kelsha Undong, the religious society movement of the Koryo dynasty, of which Chino was a part. He had one of these Kelsas, the Changye Kelsa, at Songkwangsa. And he was trying to find a way to accommodate lay people in the community as well. So I think that's going to be a model that will help to support the monastic community by one problem is when you have a declining monastic community, you have less and less toban around. But if you sort of support the existing monks and nuns with a lay community who's actively present and actively supportive, I think, of the monastic community, that will help both to flourish. I just wanted to say that I think after living and practicing in the Theravada tradition, in Chinese Mahayana, and in Korea, I think Korea has a much more compelling practice tradition. Monks and nuns like yourself are really deeply engaged with the whole practice dimension of Buddhism, which is something you don't see in Taiwan, for example. You don't see it in Japan. You barely see it in China these days, but in Korea it's still very much alive. So a few years after I went to Korea, the Chinese monk that I stayed with in Hong Kong, Sengyak Fashi, Sheng Yi Fa Shi, he came to Korea to visit me and came to Songkwangsa, and he was just overwhelmed. He said, "This is exactly like I remember Chinese monasteries being." As I have watched the tradition develop, it's been interesting to see that friends of mine who I was close to as a young monk are now these great teachers and have become the leaders of Korean Buddhism. And so it really struck me last year, 작년에는 그 구산 스님 입장하신 지 40년 됐는데, 그러니까 뭐 해가지고 우리 송강사 계시는 스님들이 같이 있으세요. 그때 다 계시는 사람들. 그냥 my old friend 현복 스님 was the pangjang, and we had ordained together as monks. 같이 미국에 받았어요. 그 송강사에서. 그러니까 현복 스님 pangjang. So I really had this sense of being part of a tradition. When I was a young monk, the pictures on the wall were people like Hyobong S님. And now I go back, and up on the wall is my teacher, Kusan S님, is up there. And now my friends are the Pangjangs. And I really had this sense that very soon we are going to be up on the wall. And at that point, it's going to be you who are the ones who are going to be the leaders of Korean Buddhism. And the tradition is really in your hands. You are the ones that you have been waiting for. So we think we can wait for somebody like a Sangcho Snim, or a Kusan Snim, or a Muyo Snim, or a Changmeng Snim. But actually, we're waiting for you. And I think it's really important that you learn about your tradition and learn why I think your tradition is such a precious item in the Buddhist world today. So I would just say in conclusion that In the Pali Nikayas, there's a phrase: a monk is trying to find out the truth about the universe. So he wants to use spiritual powers to travel around to discover the universe, and ask the Buddha if this is the correct way or not, to discover the real meaning of the universe. So a monk comes to the Buddha and asks the Buddha, I want to find out the real nature of the universe. I want to use my spiritual powers to travel to the end of the universe to find out truth. Is this correct? And Buddha 말씀 하시기를, in this very body, you can see the entirety of the universe. You don't need to look outside. And so I think in this small peninsula of Korea, you can see the entirety of Buddhism right here, right now. You don't need to look outside. Well, I think the main message I've had all the way through, the reason why I wanted to come was I really wanted you to appreciate how much a Westerner like myself, how much meaning I found in Korean Buddhism, how much meaning in my life Korean Buddhism gave to me. And I think that this is something which can be meaningful to others as well in the West. Because when I was in Korea, Koreans were hardly traveling outside Korea at that time. They didn't know anything about it. So when they heard I had come from Thailand, they would say, oh, Sosombulyo. They wouldn't know Theravada, it was just Sosombulyo. But now, because Koreans are able to travel and are much more aware of what's going on outside their country, you become interested in Vipassana or in Tibetan Buddhism and other traditions, just like Westerners have done also. It's fascinating to see, but I think sometimes that's been to the detriment of knowing their own tradition. And so that's really what the main messages I wanted to convey during my time with you is I really hope you can appreciate how fortunate you are to be in such a vibrant and such a distinguished religious tradition as Korean Buddhism. It's really a treasure that I hope that you can treasure in your hearts as well.
우리 불이선에 오시는 스님들께서 요번에 오셔서도 저한테 그 얘기를 해주셨지만 불이선에 왔다 가면 에너지를 얻는데요. 그러니까 다시 기운이 채워진다는 거예요. 서로에게 이렇게 빛이 되어주고 거울 되어주고 저 사람을 통해 반사되어진 나에게 그 빛을 통해 다시 수행에 힘을 얻고 또 그리고 자기 삶을 점검하고 불이선에만큼 점검하기 좋은 데가 또 있을까?
막연히 그냥 삶이 수행이다. 그런 생각을 하긴 했어요. 근데 이제 이 불이선에서 의미는 그런 그 삶이 수행이라고 하는 그 말이 진정 삶이 수행일 수 있도록 이론적인 체계를 같이 공부하고 공유한다는 것. 그런 그 이론적인 것을 바탕으로 볼 때 어쩌면 지금까지 내가 살아오면서 내가 이렇게 사는 것이 맞나? 라고 사실 고민과 갈등을 많이 했거든요. 많이 했던 그런 부분들이 이런 시간을 통해서 그래, 내가 지금까지 살았던 것에 대해서 자부심을 가져도 되겠다. 라고 하는 측면이 느껴진 거. 이것이 아마 어쩌면 가장 큰 수학이 아닌가 이런 생각을 해요.
Well, actually, it's been really exciting to see that there's a mechanism now in Korea for monks and nuns to get together as a group from all different monastic lineages in Korea, with a whole range of different backgrounds and training to get together and practice together as a group. I think it's really important this group practice aspect. They call it 대중생활 in Korea. That's something which is really distinctive, I think, in Buddhism. In Thailand, like I said, you practice by yourself. You don't practice together as a group. So it's something which is really quite interesting in Korea, and it's something which I think really brings real advantages to people's practice. And so the fact you're able to create a mechanism where you can come together as a group like this and learn together, work together, practice together, live together, like you say. It's a really important thing to maintain. So I hope this is a tradition that will continue long into the future. Sure.